Loving the new intro, Jody. We are back for Treasury Talks alongside Rothy, Jody, and our special guest, Boyd Cohen, who's the Chief Strategy Officer over at Arcadia B. So, Boyd, it looks a little nicer than it is. Well, I have the fake background, but I was just mentioning it's flooding here in New York. Very beautiful down in Mexico. Welcome to Treasury Talks.
Thanks. Yeah, it's actually not that deceiving. It's like in the 70s here, sunny here in Monterrey, Mexico.
Amazing. Well, I know we got a huge day ahead of us. We got strategy earning calls at 5, so we want to make sure we focus on you here today. What is Arcadia B? And what's your background too, for those that don't know you?
So Arcadia B was founded as Capital X back in 2017, the first and the longest running Bitcoin fintech services business in Mexico. Grew in a bootstrapped way, didn't raise external funding. This was predates me, and I joined 3 months ago as the Chief Strategy Officer to do two things: scale the underlying Bitcoin business and bring us into the treasury space as the first treasury company in Mexico as well. So that's sort of what the company is, and then just my brief background. PhD in the University of Colorado in business and particularly innovation entrepreneurship. I did get exposure, first time ever in my career was to Austrian economics back then, but just barely, and I didn't really let it sink in until many years later. I've had this weird hybrid career between being a founder of several tech startups. I know our audience, including myself, will be embarrassed to hear what I'm about to say, but my last startup was a blockchain company in the sort of more of the smart contract ecosystem. I was CEO of that company based in Barcelona, Spain. We ran it for 7 years. I stepped down as CEO a year and a half ago, took a role in an academic position in Arcadia Business School, #1 school in Latin America as part of Tec de Monterrey, based here in Monterrey, Mexico. And it was like just a matter of time before the startup kind of innovation bug would hit me, and I had to, go back to my preferred spaces in innovation entrepreneurship. And when I moved here, I got super deep in Bitcoin, just kept going deeper and deeper down the rabbit hole. Confessed my sins of previously being interested in the crypto and blockchain space, and I was forgiven by the Bitcoin ecosystem, and here I am now. I wrote a book that was published in May of this year called Bitcoin Singularity. We can chat about that. I think it was the first book ever published that had at least a whole chapter on the topic of Bitcoin treasury companies. And that's how I met Ed Jeline, for example, who was formerly Director of Bitcoin Advocacy at Strategy. Long story short, he became one of our biggest investors in our first friends and family round. We closed very recently, and he's also on our executive team. So that's the nutshell story.
Yeah, that's awesome there. So I know that I met you for the first time in New York at the Unconference for the Bitcoin Treasury Companies. And I think that one thing that we don't hear a lot about is Mexico as an opportunity for Bitcoin and Bitcoin companies. It's a country immediately to the south of the US. I know that the three of us are all Americans, and there's plenty of people who watch are Americans, and I'm sure people from around the world. But what excites you about the opportunity specifically in Mexico, Boyd, and why is that sort of really unique, I guess?
Yeah, no, I think that's an important question. It's the 15th largest economy in the world measured by GDP, 130 million people. We're also the gateway between the US and the Spanish-speaking Latin American market. Brazil, of course, is its own ecosystem and Portuguese-speaking. And the overall Latin American market's 450 million. But Mexico is the engine that drives the Latin American economy, the Spanish-speaking part. And, we're in the hub of that. We are the first company to offer Bitcoin services dedicated in the country. And now we're the first to initiate plans for the public treasury strategy. There's a lot of trapped capital here. You start with the pension funds. It's about $350 billion. They have pretty strict constraints around deploying capital in foreign markets and requirements to invest in public equities and public issuances in Mexico. But the liquidity in the market for equity and debt instruments in Mexico isn't as vibrant as you'd find in other markets. So it's kind of like there's a big gap in the market. The returns haven't been great for the pension funds or obviously for the treasuries, public treasuries. I think there's something like $700 billion invested domestically in the bond markets in Mexico, and those are returning less than the M2 growth, which is 10%. And on top of that, we have an arbitrage like in Japan that nobody talks about, which is for the retail investor. So a high income earner in Mexico is exposed to 35% tax on capital gains, which is applied to the sale of spot Bitcoin. But there's a cap for retail investors of only 10% on equities and public instruments that they invest in and have a gain on. So that's also an untapped aspect of the Mexican market.
That's certainly what gets people excited about MetaPlanet. Even with like mNAV compression, there's still that very unique market of like low yields in Japan and the arbitrage of tax, like of having capital gains. Why do you think it gets overlooked?
I think Mexico's overlooked in general. I think, for a lot of people in the Bitcoin world, but even broader in industry and finance, I think it's an underappreciated opportunity sort of from a market perspective. I think there's a perception of narco traffickers and, crime. And so people from other markets don't want to be aggressive in this market. They kind of want to stay arm's length away from it. It's a misperception. There's isolated crime in many parts of Mexico, of course, but I know this will offend some of your American listeners, and I'm an American too, but the data shows that you're more likely to be killed on the streets in an American city than in a Mexican city. The violent crime that happens in Mexico around drug trafficking is usually gang-on-gang violence, people involved in the drug scene somehow, and usually this is kind of like, the thing that happens more in maybe developing markets, but the government seems to have had at the national and regional local level, they kind of come up with some kind of truce with the drug gangs where they basically say you have to isolate your crime outside of urban areas where normal people live and work, and if you're going to kill each other, then you have to do it outside of our city streets, and if you come in our city streets and start doing that stuff, you're going to get a crackdown that you don't want. And so where we live in Monterrey and San Pedro is crazy beautiful. Mountains everywhere, very advanced economy, highest net GDP per capita in all of Latin America is in the community where we live and where our company is based. So I think there's a misperception about the market in terms of safety and, the market opportunity and it's just a lot of poorer people, but there's a lot of wealth in this country, a lot. And it's mostly been accumulated by family businesses that started a century ago and gradually, diversified and built multi-billion-dollar portfolios. So I think it's something like 95% of the GDP in Mexico comes from family business. So it's a nuanced market, but lots of upside.
I'm going to ask a question that may be a little challenging here, but, just given where we are at now with treasury companies, I'd say when they first popped up, there was coffee shops that were buying Bitcoin and they'd spike 50% in a day, right? Unfortunately, that's not the case today. Even Strategy, the behemoth of them all, I think was down like 7 or 8% today. So what have you learned, I guess, pre-launch now? Has that changed your strategy, seeing some of the mistakes maybe some of these treasury companies have made, or just the general vibe that's happening? What kind of learnings have you taken prior to your launch, and what is going to be the strategy around buying Bitcoin? Is that going to be spot? Are you guys going to have it programmatic? Talk us through a little bit of that.
So I think the broader thesis around Bitcoin treasury companies as a speculative attack on fiat, and even Saylor himself frequently refers to the fact that there's likely to be at least one winner, major player who wins most in all the major economies of the world. I think that thesis still holds true for the very same reason. We all know what's happening with fiat, with debasement. We all know that most assets are underperforming when you compare it to the debasement rates, which is true in Mexico. We all know there's trapped capital in every country for all kinds of reasons, including in Mexico. So the thesis that there's going to be a successful speculative attack in every country is still valid. I think also beyond that, the thesis is still valid that some of us in the Treasury community accept and embrace, is that the future of the most successful companies in every country and in the world are going to be those who have the most Bitcoin, and figure out what to do with Bitcoin, how to generate more, how to offer services associated with Bitcoin, how to accept Bitcoin, how to pay their employees in Bitcoin. Why is that? Because Bitcoin is the world's best collateral. It's the world's best reserve asset, and it's going to be eventually the world's best currency too. So I think all that thesis remains. I think the market, obviously it's mNAV is suppressed for a lot of reasons. There was a lot of euphoria early on, which happens in all new sectors. So it's not surprising. Of course, MicroStrategy or strategy now exceeded most people's expectations, and that sort of helped drum up the fervor around it. So, some of that was going to die down anyway. That just what happens. But we're going to see a return to foundational analytics that justify mNAVs above 1. I'm pretty sure of that. And I think how much above 1 is going to be contingent on so many things. What's happening in the broader Bitcoin community, what's happening in the local economy, what is the company doing to execute in a way that's smart leverage? What are they doing around an operating business or not? And is there synergy with that? So there's a lot of variables, but I think the thesis is still true. And if you do really have a low time preference, which we're supposed to have as Bitcoiners, you don't worry about short-term stock price fluctuations. So that's like the big picture take we have around the Treasury space. Nothing that has happened over the last few months, the FUD in the space, has deterred us or our partners and investors in the ecosystem that are already fully convicted on what we're doing and the team we have and everything else. So from that perspective, nothing has changed. I think there has been lessons learned. Some of them were probably obvious even at the time, let alone in retrospect, pipes with large discounts, dumping on retail investors as soon as you go public. Like you have to design that out of your raise strategy. It just can't be part of it, because it's just, we learned that lesson from the ICOs in the crypto space, and I was in that world for a while. So you can't do that, and we know that. I'm so thankful to the Treasury community, and Brian, that unconference we were at together. I was on stage with Andrew Webley, who, I have mad respect for what he's doing and the way he's doing it, how transparent he is about what he's doing, the path they've taken, the speed at which they grew, but doing it in a very transparent way. He's has an allergic reaction to discounted rounds in the private stages of raising towards your public listing, and he informed our thinking. And I have one-on-one conversations with him now because we shared a stage together, and we were able to connect. I don't say this too much in a public forum, but I'll say it. I also met Matt Cole there, and Matt Cole has been gracious enough to provide me private one-on-one ad hoc advice on some of our strategies. He even looked at one of our new instruments the other day and gave us feedback on it. And what I'm trying to say there is, so we're learning macro level strategies around fundraising. We're learning micro guidance around specific instruments we want to release. And we're learning by observing how some of the best players in the space are behaving, how they're communicating with their shareholders and stakeholders, the types of instruments they're bringing to market. But yet at the same time, we're different than all of them. I think the thing that is so different, we can spend more time going into it. And I believe this is fundamentally severely underexplored in the Treasury space. You guys tell me if I'm wrong. But the synergies of a native Bitcoin business being an LBE style Treasury play are not talked about enough. And we are extremely excited about what we can do that some of the other treasury companies can't, because we have built out a whole host of Bitcoin fintech and services that we offer to our customers that we can leverage and use for ourselves.
Yeah.
I'll say real quick to that, and then I'll let Brian go. That's exactly what we want to dive into, because Avi and I were talking about months ago, operating business, treasury companies weren't valued as highly as someone like MetaPlanet, like pure vehicle. The hotel industry is not what people are investing for, and now people are looking. Oh, hey, with mNAVs compressed, like operating business sounds nice. Cash flow does sound nice. Cash is king. So yeah, we'd love to dive into more, unpack that. Because you see companies like Binance that are incredibly wealthy. Their CEOs or former CEOs, founders are getting pardoned, or there's people that are very, very nascent to like making a lot of money, both when the market goes up and down, such as Coinbase, Kraken, Gemini. That's all these exchanges that we follow. So I'd love to hear more on the cash flow side and how you think that like differentiates when you do have these downturns. Brian, I don't know if we were going to ask that, but I know you as an investor want to get in that area too.
Absolutely. I think also there are a couple of companies that have been out there that said that they wanted to do things with like the Lightning Network and nodes and things of that nature. But, I know that this is something very specific that you've mentioned in different conversations with me, but also that's very important to you about why you're involved with Arcadia B. So diving into, that model and everything that you think there. And it's probably, I don't want to call this a preview or anything else, but it's probably something that I would imagine somebody like Jack Mallers at XXI wants to do, but we haven't had the opportunity to see or hear about that because they've been sort of working their process, which is on permanent pause since our government here in the US is shut down. So would love to dive in really deep as far as you want to go with the services you're doing, the cool things coming. I know I was looking at your website earlier, can I get that Visa card in America when it comes out? Is that going to work for me, or am I going to have to pay foreign transaction fees? Let's go down that rabbit hole, Boyd.
Yeah, looking forward to it. So you touched the surface on the value or synergy between having an operating business that has revenue. We're profitable. It was a bootstrap company when I came to it, and already reached profitability. We have actually. Can I share a screen or no?
Hit the that little plus sign.
Got it. I'm going to share it. So there's one graphic that kind of helps explain the synergy and kind of a real simple way, I hope, that we've built.
Boyd, we're not seeing it. We're just getting a black screen there, unfortunately.
I was just typing to you guys.
Okay, so let me try again. Sorry.
This is what happens when you do a podcast live here, everyone. So
Exactly. How about now? If not,
There you go.
Yeah,
okay.
we're cooking.
Sorry about the delay there. Okay, so it's like peeling the layers of the onion. So I'll tell the story. So, okay, first of all, the question around having, a profitable, low to zero debt kind of existing operating business, no matter what the business is. And I know that's the thesis of a lot of investors right now, is that yes, they'd like to have that from a treasury company for different reasons. It can allow them to service the debt from their instruments they release, or, bear the brunt of bear markets in the Bitcoin space, whatever. So yes, that's like, a thesis many have that I do agree with, that having a source of revenue that's means you're not entirely reliant only on positive sentiment in the public markets to grow your business, to raise your Bitcoin. 100% agree. But, we're one of the only companies in the world, and Brian, you're absolutely right about Jack Mallers. I'm actually going to be speaking about Arcadia B in Amsterdam, the Bitcoin Amsterdam event in a couple weeks, and he's going to be there. And I can't wait to hear more of what he has to say, if he's able to say anything, because so far he hasn't been able to say very much. But, we're expecting to be blown away by what they end up doing with 21 and Tether and them regarding finding true synergies between native Bitcoin business models and the treasury strategy. But we're literally one of the first treasury companies in the world that's already got very vibrant, active Bitcoin business. And that is what we are. It's not a side thing. It's not maybe we'll experiment with nodes. We already operate 2 Lightning nodes. That's been going on for a long time. But that's just like the surface level, what we already do. And then you can imagine what we can do. So let me walk you through some of that. First of all, we have a very vibrant Bitcoin brokerage business. September, just as an example, was $7 million in transaction volume in Mexico for our brokerage business alone. And so we get the best rates in Mexico for acquiring Bitcoin. Guess what? When we acquire Bitcoin, we have the path to get the best rates on Bitcoin. You know what else we have? We built our own custody solution in-house. We built that for our customers, but we also built it for our own use because we've already been earning in Bitcoin from our native Bitcoin business, and we've been custodying that Bitcoin ourselves. And on top of it, we have a growing customer base, maybe in part for what we said earlier in this conversation around the perception of crime and security in Mexico. Wealthy Mexicans who are, stacking Bitcoin don't really want to be self-custodying their own Bitcoin. And so we have a growing demand for our own custody solution. Well, guess what? That means we will be one of the only treasury companies in the world, we already are, that actually can custody their own Bitcoin with their own technology built in-house. We have a Bitcoin-backed loan in Mexico. Well, and that's one of our fastest growing sides of our business. Well, this is going to be like a scandalous thing to say, but I'll say it anyway. If in the event we issue some kind of instrument that has some debt service requirements to it, like, many of the ones Strategy and others issue that have, 8 to 10 to 12% yield on them, and we find ourselves short on capital, maybe the markets are weak, we could actually leverage our stack if we wanted to secure fiat loans to pay off these fiat yield payments without having to sell our Bitcoin. But yeah, we're putting our Bitcoin to use with our own loan program that we already offer to customers. Okay, so why is all of this so interesting is that not only do we have revenue that's not just tied to raising money in the public markets, that revenue tends to be in Bitcoin already because that's our business. We organically earn Bitcoin. Well, that retained earnings in Bitcoin, what does that do? Increases our mNAV, increases our yield without any dilution, without any public issuance of instruments. When the bear markets come or we have bad days, like there was that flash crash was actually one of our most active trading days from our customers in our platform. So we're still generating revenue even in a flash crash in the Bitcoin world. And then on top of it all, there's more to this story, but I'll close with this point and open up to wherever you guys want to take the conversation. When we're talking to institutions now, obviously this is a kind of conversation I can't disclose any details on, but one of those happened today with a company that has more than 200 million USD in their own treasury, sitting in cash and cash equivalents. And they're bullish on buying our public instruments when they're available. And they have never done that. They want exposure to Bitcoin. There is no way for a public company to get exposure to Bitcoin in Mexico if they're not allowed to or don't want to do Bitcoin in self-custody. There is no ETF in Mexico. We're the only company on path to have listed instruments in the Mexican public markets. There will be more, of course, that will follow us for sure. But the point is, when we sit in front of these people and we say, okay, we help orange pill them, or in this particular case, that company, the person who is the responsible administrator of their treasury is actually a closet Bitcoin maxi. So how many of them exist all around Mexico that are in, positions of leadership that could make these decisions? But so we don't have to orange pill them. But so maybe there's some orange pilling that happens. Maybe they've already got it. Okay, you want exposure to Bitcoin? How do you want it? Are you in a position to have Bitcoin in self-custody? We got you. You can buy Bitcoin from us at the best rate possible. Are you wanting to have spot Bitcoin, but for various reasons you don't want to have your own self-custody? Maybe you want multi-institutional custody. Maybe you want a multi-sig and you have one of the keys. We got you covered. We can do that. I know none of those are really what you want right now. You really just want public exposure to a public instrument. We got you there too. So to close the loop on all this, besides all the other synergies of how these services we built for our customers can be leveraged by us in our own business, besides the fact we can generate Bitcoin organically from our business, we have synergy in the sense that we can go to the same customer and offer them a full range of exposure to Bitcoin that virtually no other company in the world can do right now. And so we want to be, in a nutshell, our aim is to basically be the river of Mexico and hopefully eventually Latin America, and the strategy of Mexico and hopefully in the future Spanish-speaking Latin America, because Brazil has some strong emerging players in the treasury space, so excluding them. So that's the ambition.
Boyd, on MSTR strategy earnings day, have to follow up with, people have talked continuously about, is strategy going to become like the biggest bank in the world in the future? You see the vision, you see the graphic you were just showing. What's the path in Mexico to becoming a bank? In the US, you have, Anchorage Digital, you had Paxos with temporary charter for a while, but lost it. So you had these, during Trump's first term, Brian Brooks was the comptroller of the OCC. And so you were able to get, Anchorage was able to get this huge competitive advantage by getting this OCC chartered bank as a national bank that had MTLs everywhere. But it was really hard afterwards in the previous administration getting any kind of banking license. What's the path in Mexico? Is that something you're not even talking about now, but you're building a lot of the building blocks and foundation for that?
Good insight, Jody. I've had some discussions with my partner, Jose Carlos, on this. He doesn't ever want me to use the word bank in a public forum because it's a loaded term that's highly regulated, and we have to be extremely careful about referring to that and us in that way. But you said it, not me, that a lot of the services we're already offering are bank-like. Custody, we're actually launching a DCA, so it's like a savings account strategy. We have a credit card that is going to soon have Bitcoin cash back to it. So we have a Bitcoin backed lending program. So it sounds a lot like a bank kind of stuff for Bitcoiners, right? I forgot to mention, we have we're the only, I think, Bitcoin company in Mexico that has fairly recently gotten the financial regulatory certification to offer custody and lending services as like a financial institution. So we're regulated as a fintech, but not as a bank, of course. I was talking to my partner about this question you bring up right now, Jody, literally this week, about what would it take. And he's deeper in the space. He's Mexican. Comes from a family company that have publicly listed companies, etc. And he said it would be at least a year to get like the first minimum banking license that'd be required to offer some limited more banking services. So it is on our agenda, something we would consider. It comes with so much extra regulatory hoops and barriers that we may be better off being a pseudo Bitcoin bank without actually ever using the word bank in the reference to our marketing or what we do, and just avoid that additional constraint. It really will depend more on where market demand takes us and whether some services our customers would require us to have a banking license. So I'm not sure yet, but you're right on to say that, a lot of the underlying things we're doing are bank-like. I 100% agree with the assumption, even though Michael Saylor refuses to publicly admit to it, that the natural evolution of strategy will have to be some kind of Bitcoin bank. I just don't see many other alternatives. And my guess is they'll end up doing a lot of kinds of things we're doing now at a much bigger scale, because they're starting with 640,000 Bitcoin, or however many they have when they turn on that switch.
Yeah. You go ahead, Brian.
No, I was going to say that's all very interesting. So I guess one of my next questions, Boyd, is, how can I get involved in this? So do you have plans to go public with Arcadia B? And then when you're talking about these yield products, what kind of scale do you need for some of those things? And I understand if some of those things may be prohibited by law or anything for you to talk about, but whatever you can share, I'm sure we'd all like to learn more, because this seems really interesting, right? It's sort of that same kind of business that, Jack is talking about with XXI, and he's got Strike and all these things that go with it. So how do you put that together? We're doing that with a private company down in Mexico, and we've got visions of grandeur to do more. But, what does that look like for public markets?
Yeah. So the path to public listing in Mexico is unique, and it's bureaucratic for having a full IPO and time consuming. First of all, you have to have 3 years of audited financial reports. So you can't do this as a startup, like right out of the gate. You either have to acquire a shell company, do some kind of SPAC thing, or you have to be an existing operator of some business and be able to get that level of auditing of your previous financials. So that we've got 8 years of track record. So that part we're good on. We already had audits, but they're not at the level we need for our public listing. So we're working with Baker Tilly on that, which is, a prominent auditing firm, globally focused, but they have a strong Mexican branch. So that's underway right now. And that's the biggest hurdle to our first publicly listed instruments. But that's an important caveat that I say instruments, not IPO. I haven't seen this in other markets, and maybe you guys have. There must be. I just haven't spent enough time researching it because it doesn't matter to me that much. But in Mexico, there are these things called certificados. They're like certificates. They're public instruments, usually debt or convertible, preferred, not direct common stock, but they can be issued by private companies in Mexico if they meet the financial requirements and the auditing and all the rest of it. And once they're issued, they are tradable with their own tickers, and they're listed in the public markets. So those exist already. We're moving towards those, the certificate model. In the last couple of years, Mexico approved a new law called Régimen Simplificado, which basically is a version of certificate that's even easier and faster for startups or growing tech or businesses that are private to start issuing public instruments. And the first of those types of certificates will start to be released in Q1 of 2026. So the government has finally approved it. BIVA, which is one of the exchanges, we were with them last week. We had this amazing experience wearing these hats, and we had a meeting in BIVA's private, like, beautiful office space with our auditors, and then they brought us to the trading floor, and we had these on, and some people on the trading floor like, that's the Bitcoin logo. The people on the trading floor didn't know anything about what we're doing. We were working with other people that help the companies that are about to list. And so we ended up in this big discussion, why Bitcoin, not Ethereum? Some of them had bought Ethereum, previously bought Bitcoin, and we explained what we're doing around the treasury strategy. They got all excited. Oh, that's MSTR. We know that. You're going to do that in Mexico? That's amazing. And then when they were asking more details, and they said, well, explain exactly why is Bitcoin superior? I said, here. And I had one of these books in my backpack, and I said, okay, here, read this, and then we can talk some more. And they asked me to sign the book. They were very excited. So there's a lot of enthusiasm for what we're building and what we're trying to do here. And we're finding a lot of receptivity from the main players that we need to get approval, the investment banks, the exchanges, et cetera. So pretty optimistic about that. So the path will be working with BIVA, with Baker Tilly, investment banks, issuing our first instruments via these certificate models. We can issue within reason as many as we want over a period of time. Our goal is to have we have 16 Bitcoin right now. Our goal is to have 100 before we issue our first instrument. So we're raising from accredited investors right now, mostly on both sides of the border. So US and Mexico are participating in private rounds. non-discounted rounds because we've learned our lesson from the pipe failure. So there's a better way of designing these instruments that give private investors upside without, screwing over retail investors when there's a full public listing of an IPO. So we're going to be doing this along the way. We can't say when we have an expectation of when our first instruments will be publicly available, but I'm not allowed to say that. But then we will eventually go through full IPO as the process allows for it.
I was just looking up a fun article that said the third richest person in Mexico was 80% Bitcoin. They're
Ricardo
moving to
Salinas.
100. Yeah, so they're moving to 100% Bitcoin. So, and we've talked to some lending companies who've also mentioned like Mexico is a very big hotspot, in the space. So, what's the appetite with the president? Like, what's the government's view on Bitcoin overall? It seemed favorable from what you shared earlier, at least from a tax perspective. But I tried to look up some information beforehand. It didn't seem like that, not like Trump, where he's out there, launching his own token, saying Bitcoin's the greatest thing ever. Have you been closer to that in terms of the government's perspective?
So the government is a bit more like behaving around Bitcoin and crypto broadly, kind of the way the US was under the Biden administration, but not as antagonistic. I would argue it's more indifferent and ignorant, if I can say that. They're not paying much attention to it. They have other issues they're worrying about. There isn't a lot of proactive lobbying to support Bitcoin, crypto, stable coins in Mexico. I've had a few conversations with a former governor of the board of the Central Bank of Mexico on these topics. And the first question was, well, where's the Central Bank of Mexico on this? He said they're aware of Bitcoin. They don't really understand it, and they have zero strategy around it. And he's on the board of 5 of the largest companies in Mexico. One is a bank, one is the largest construction-related company in Mexico, one of the largest in their vertical in the world. He's on the boards of 5 companies. He said not once on any board meeting has the word Bitcoin ever come up in any discussion. So it's more of like apathy towards Bitcoin under the current administration. So again, it's not as antagonistic as the US. There's just not a very informed opinion with a policy strategy or anything else. So it's kind of good or bad. In Mexico, they're kind of known. I'm learning this as I go more, but like the Mexican economy in general, like credible players are known when they're pushing the envelope of things that have never been done and they're not really properly regulated. There's a bit of like, do it and ask for forgiveness later. And then you go back to the regulators and say, okay, we're doing this. There is no clear regulatory regime around this. Can we help you figure out what a regime should be? And they often almost prefer to see something get to some scale so it makes sense for them to invest the time and energy and resources to actually regulate that space. So, we have people advising us that don't want us to go that direction. They're very focused on let's get the regulators on board before we start issuing all these instruments. So we're working on that confidentially behind the scenes. But going back to your comment about Ricardo Salinas, because it directly goes back to your other question about the government. Ricardo Salinas is in an open dispute with the national government over taxes, over a whole lot of things. Ricardo is extremely Bitcoin savvy. He just published a book about Bitcoin. As you said, he's top 5 wealthiest people in Mexico, multi-billionaire. He was a gold bug and he gradually moved up the chain into Bitcoin and then increased his portfolio allocation. I think it was like 6 months ago, he announced he was now at 70% holding of Bitcoin, and now he's at 80%, which, is basically what happens to all of us, just not with as many zeros.
I was going to say.
So there's circulating media rumors, discussion that maybe Salinas is going to try to challenge to be the next president of Mexico. What I'm hearing from people I know, because they're connected enough because of the Bitcoin community and everything, that it's unlikely he actually has aspirations to be the next president of Mexico. He's a pretty busy man and he likes to be in the private sector. But from what I understand, he'd love to fund or support a candidate that is more pro Bitcoin, but also has his view of how to run an economy. So we'll see what happens. But yeah, there's a lot of tension at the high level between Ricardo in particular and the national government.
Interesting.
I'll jump in here. So one thing I wanted to ask about, because I think it is very commendable growing the Bitcoin ecosystem. Obviously 21 rates, what we're working on is, hey, here's the Bitcoin economy. Let's provide a nerd wallet type information, free education, be smart with your Bitcoin, choose good providers, protect it, choose people like River, choose people like Arcadia, that are being transparent about how they're doing custody. So one thing that Michael Saylor's gotten criticism for, like he's doing a lot. So for the space, but as the face of it, people have criticized that he hasn't really propelled forward the common everyday use cases of peer-to-peer cash that was like outlined in the white paper, the Lightning Network, and just increasing the adoption of Bitcoin by like merchants. For you guys, you're taking a little bit different stance. You have financial products, you have Bitcoin, backed loans, you have cards. Do you see yourselves as taking a very different stance of that, of, hey, we're not just going to follow, the strategy playbook and use this as a corporate balance sheet asset like gold that never gets moved. We actually want the transaction velocity to increase with Bitcoin while you also use it as a treasury asset. Can you unpack that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, as you said, like, I think we all need to pay homage to Saylor and what he's done to break down barriers for all of us in the treasury space in particular, in terms of, like the experience I had on the trading floor at the BIVA stock market. Like, they get it. They were excited because we're doing something similar to Saylor. Like, if he wasn't doing what he's doing, we wouldn't be doing what we're doing. So, having said that, with full respect, there's a lot of things I don't always agree with him, or at least don't align with our approach. And as you say, one of those is we definitely embrace the medium of exchange component of Bitcoin. Now, it's not a core part of our business as much as it is others, around wallets for direct transaction. We have a wallet, but, our customers do, myself included, we do buy things with Bitcoin all the time through the app, etc. We even have a point of sale service for retailers that we offer where they can accept Bitcoin as payment and then choose what percentage they want to allocate to saving in Bitcoin versus immediate conversion, kind of like what Dorsey's doing with their terminals. So we embrace I would argue we embrace the full freedom potential of Bitcoin in all its beautiful colors. And that means everything from the Lightning Network. We operate 2 nodes. It means supporting retailers and adopting Bitcoin as a payment. Also, using Bitcoin as collateral. As I mentioned, our fastest growing service today is actually Bitcoin-backed lending. I think, I'm not saying anything that's rocket science. Everybody's watching this space thinks the same thing. The growing adoption of Bitcoin as the world's most pristine collateral, it's just going to keep exploding, and we're going to see a lot of innovation in that space. I think we will see treasury companies start to use their own Bitcoin in that way. And of course, they'll have to design it into their instruments that gives them the right to do that. And this gets into a gray area where absolutely turned off and disgusted by any rehypothecation approaches to Bitcoin, the sort of true paper Bitcoin. But like I said, would we ever be willing to leverage our own lending program to service the debt on our Bitcoin instruments? Yeah, we would. We'd rather do that than have to sell our Bitcoin to actually service the debt. And, some companies may eventually find themselves having to sell their Bitcoin, but because we do our own custody and we have our own lending program, we have that potential. So my TLDR is, yeah, we're obviously building a very different approach to the Bitcoin business and the treasury business and say a strategy. And we're doing it in a way that makes total sense in Mexico and for our journey that we've been on. As an early player in the Bitcoin community in Mexico, we've been building that credibility, that trust in the market, that we're here to stay. We have a low time preference, that we're safe, that, you know, we've never lost people's Bitcoin in our own custody models or anything like that. All those things help engender confidence. And our goal is to really accelerate the adoption of Bitcoin in Mexico. And when we get to a certain scale, our goal is to do that beyond the borders of Mexico into other Spanish-speaking markets. And we hope that the synergies between our treasury business and our Bitcoin fintech services grow, and that we're able to expand those in other markets too.
You took the thunder. Go ahead,
I was just gonna jump in here, and I didn't know if you have another question. I was gonna wrap it up and talk about the book that you wrote. So with Bitcoin Singularity, available on Amazon. Everyone that's listening, go out and buy it. Can you touch on it a little bit in terms of, you know, a summary of what your book is bringing to the table? We just actually did an interview with Natalie Brunell with Bitcoin is for Everyone. And so bringing a lot of authors on. Would love to hear a little bit more about Bitcoin Singularity.
Yeah, thanks for bringing it up. So when I started going deep down the rabbit hole, so my background, I didn't mention this when you asked about my history, but I have a lot of background in the intersection of technology and like societal grand challenges. And how can we leverage technology to address sustainability, climate, you know, income, inclusivity, et cetera. So that's been my career with my own startups and in my own research as an academic, and the courses I've taught has been around the intersection of exponential technology and sort of better sustainable outcomes for humanity. And one of the things that really triggered me in a positive way as I started going down the rabbit hole was the fix the money, fix the world thesis of Bitcoin that a lot of Bitcoiners talk about. But, you know, I read, you can see them behind me. I read Saifedean's book. It was the first Bitcoin book I read. And then I read Larry Lepard's book. We actually did a book exchange in Vegas back in May. So he's got mine, I got his, which was cool. Several other books that are like Jeff Booth's book. And all those do such a phenomenal job of explaining what the base problem is, what the history of money is, how we went wrong with fiat, how, you know, moving to sound money is going to like return the world to where it needs to be. But like the fix the money, fix the world was missing for me. It's like everybody was talking about it, but I was like, okay, well, how does this actually manifest in the real world? Over what period of time, with what level of Bitcoin adoption, will we see the world transform because of Bitcoin, hyper-Bitcoinization, and how? What exactly are the areas of our lives and the world that are already being addressed by Bitcoin or have the potential to be transformed when Bitcoin becomes ubiquitous? And so my book is basically going through 3 epochs. So I say we're in the first phase, which is Bitcoinization, which is basically early adopters before we, you know, cross the chasm in any major aspect of Bitcoin adoption, which is where we are now. You have pockets of, you know, small businesses using Bitcoin. You have pockets of public companies using Bitcoin. You have pockets of early countries that are starting to stack Bitcoin or mine Bitcoin, et cetera. But we're not crossing the chasm in any of those in terms of wide scale adoption. So then I say, you know, that's where we are now, and what are the positive impacts we're starting to see from that? And then I go into, okay, after 2030 is when I project we start to move into the hyper-Bitcoinization phase, which is basically when we start to cross the chasm. People need to keep in mind nothing is binary. It's not black and white. It's not like in December 31st, 2029, we're still in Bitcoinization, and the next day we're all of a sudden in hyper-Bitcoinized. No, but we start to see more and more adoption in 2030 where it starts to become more mainstream in the press. It becomes more common in more restaurants and businesses to see we accept Bitcoin, et cetera. More companies are starting to put Bitcoin on their balance sheets. And so the book basically says, okay, then what happens in that phase when we start moving into hyper-Bitcoinization? How does that change the world around energy, food, whatever? And then I go all the way to what I call Bitcoin Singularity, which is like the hopeful end state of this, which would be basically not only have we adopted Bitcoin at scale around the world for all the stakeholders, Not necessarily every single person on earth and company on earth is using it, but a majority of them are. But also the ethos of the cypherpunk becomes spread out. This low time preference, less government intervention, less war, more freedom of movement, where people are just literally moving where they want to because they are getting the best services from the local government, reduced role of the nation state in terms of invading or impacting our lives. So that's basically what that book is about, is saying, okay, if Bitcoin's going to fix the world, here's how I think it will fix the world and over what time period and what parts of our lives will be transformed because of Bitcoin.
Boyd, I love it. You're sounding a lot like Balaji and like the network state. I know.
Yeah, there's overlap there. I think I cited him in the book for sure.
Yeah, I saw a little bit of that, his network state conference. I had a follow-up question for you. I haven't read it yet. We're going to put it on our website in our learning center. Is there a Bitcoin Treasury chapter? And if there's not, what would you put in there that you've learned from the past year?
There is a chapter. I think it was the first book published with a chapter on Bitcoin treasuries. It was like, as I was going to print, I was like, man, there's so many new. Strive was just, 21 was just being announced when I was finishing that chapter. And I can't remember if I even had time to fit it in or not. And so obviously I would probably cover more, especially because what we're doing here, I've become increasingly passionate about the speculative attack on fiat in different jurisdictions around the world. And so I'd like to highlight some of the companies that have emerged that are doing this really well in different markets around the world. I don't even remember if I talked about Smarter Web or not. So I would definitely bring in new examples, but I talked a lot about strategy and what Saylor did from the beginning. And I talked about Semler and some of the other players and the operating business angle, whether that's important or not. But some of these other things that we talked about today would definitely end up or in a whole book, although Anil was it Patesh, yeah. I think his last, he just came out with a whole book on it, so maybe it's not needed anymore.
Oh, I think there's definitely going to need to be more books about like the MetaPlanet story, the Smarter Web story, the Capital B story, the Arcadia B story, the Strive story. Like every single one of these companies are going to have their own little stories. And yeah, there's going to be themes throughout, but we're blazing paths here. Like it wasn't only one company that was starting in the 1900s that we talk about today. There's plenty of them. And, really, as we see these companies grow to what we all think they will be in terms of the largest companies probably in their markets, or some of them, some of the largest companies in their markets, there's going to be a lot more written in the future, but also a lot more, podcasts and videos and things that are easier to come by.
Well, Brian, maybe you can co-write the book about Arcadia when we're successful in the future.
Absolutely. Would love to do that.
Brian's a big book guy. He'll do it. He'll actually follow up in
look at his background.
Yeah, I like books, and on my bucket list is to write a novel and to write a book that's nonfiction. So it could be.
This is happening live as we talk. So. Boyd, anything we missed that you'd want to cover, or any hot takes? We like to usually end it with some sort of banger in terms of something that maybe other people in the space would disagree with you on.
I think I would say one that's controversial is I don't think we're going to see a recognized, respectable management team get underwater on leverage anytime soon. But unfortunately, I do believe we are going to see one or more than one credible treasury companies get crushed by their custody model. Something is going to happen. Black Swan, some custody, one of the big ones that there's hosting many of the company's Bitcoin holdings. Something's going to happen. They'll get hacked. They're rehypothecating in paper Bitcoin. Something's going to happen that gets ugly, and we're going to see the market no longer dismiss how important that is. There was a big, scandal around whether strategy with what Michael Saylor said will ever, do their own custody, and if they're going to do their own, proof of reserves and all that. At some point, that's going to come back, and basically every treasury company is going to be obligated to have a proper custody model that's credible and safe. And they're going to have to do proof of reserves, even though they don't have to right now.
scary, but I like the hot take. Brian, Jody, anything else on your guys' end?
It's happened
No, I'm all
before.
set.
Yeah, we've
Yeah.
seen it. Was it the Bank of England that was holding a massive amount of metals recently, like recently this year?
Gold. Yeah. They're all the central banks are rehypothecating their gold claims by crazy amounts, and there've been runs in the last year on their gold in the U.S. and in the Bank of England for that reason. So yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and I believe there was like a huge miscounting of like how much they actually had, and so it is more common than people think. If the Pentagon doesn't know how much they're spending or how much they've spent in the past, then there's no reason to think all these custodians are doing exactly, what they expect. There's too many humans in the loop, too much room for error. Boyd, it's awesome chatting with you. Shout out to Ed Julien, our friend that connected us, and love to have you guys back in the future.
Thanks, and thanks for all you guys are doing with 21 rates, and glad to have our services at Arcadia now. I think they're live on your site.
They're live as of last night.
Awesome.
Right.
Enjoy the
Great
strategy call.
Yeah,
Yeah,
too.
everyone check out the strategy call. I see they're popping a little bit right now, but we'll see.
That's our homework, right? That's our homework. We got to learn from the experts and see what's next.
Exactly. The king.
Exactly. All right, Boyd. Pleasure, and we'll definitely bring you back on.
Dale, muchas gracias.
Gracias.